I never thought the sharpest wound of my life would come, not from strangers, but from the very blood I carried into this world. My son, my own flesh, my only boy, sat across from me at the dining table with papers in his hand, and I swear the room itself grew colder. The smell of roasted chicken still lingered in the air. It was Sunday evening, and for years Sunday had been our family's day of comfort. My late husband always said, "A family that eats together stays together." I used to believe that. I used to believe this table was sacred, where laughter flowed as freely as the gravy on our mashed potatoes. But that night there was no laughter, no comfort, only a silence thick enough to strangle me. I sat there with my hands folded neatly in my lap, the arthritis in my fingers aching from the day's work in the garden. My daughter-in-law's perfume wafted across the table, sweet but sharp, like poison disguised as honey. She leaned closer to him, whispering something I couldn't catch. His eyes flickered toward me, then back down to the papers. Finally, he cleared his throat. His voice was flat, rehearsed. "Mom, we need to talk about the future." The words landed like stones in my stomach. I had heard that tone before. Once when the doctor told me my husband's cancer had spread. Once when the lawyer told me the insurance wouldn't cover all the bills. That tone meant nothing good was coming. I smiled faintly, trying to hide the fear curling in my gut. The future? What about it? He slid the papers across the table. Crisp white sheets. Legal documents. I felt my pulse quicken just looking at them. His wife leaned forward, her manicured nails tapping the edge of the stack. "It's nothing serious. Just a formality. We want to make sure everything is secure. For when the time comes. For when the time comes." The phrase echoed in my ears, cruel in its casualness. As though my death was a date to mark on the calendar, a simple line item on their to-do list. I touched the papers with trembling fingers. The words swam before my eyes, black ink bleeding into meaningless shapes. But I knew. I knew before I even read the first line. It wasn't for me. It was for them. My throat went dry. "What is this?" I managed, my voice breaking. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his wife's lips curled into a smile that never touched her eyes. "It's a power of attorney. We'll take care of your accounts, your property, your expenses. You won't have to worry about anything. You'll be free of all that stress." Her voice dripped with false sweetness, but her eyes glittered with triumph. I looked at my son. My boy. The same child I had once rocked to sleep after nightmares, the one I shielded from bullies, the one who clung to my skirt the day his father left for work and never came home again. That boy was gone. Sitting before me was a man hardened by greed, softened by his wife's whispers, and blind to the mother who had given him everything. My voice was little more than a whisper. "You want me to sign my life away?" He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Don't be dramatic. You can't handle these things anymore. Bills, banks, taxes. You're getting older, Mom. It's time to let us take over. Let us take over." I glanced at the family photographs on the wall, their faces smiling down like ghosts watching a play. My husband's portrait in the center, his eyes forever kind. What would he say if he saw this? His son demanding ownership of the life we built, our home, our sweat, our legacy. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I steadied my hands on the table. "I may be old," I said slowly, "but I am not blind." "You will not trick me into signing away my life," his wife scoffed. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You should be grateful. Most women your age are already in nursing homes. At least we're keeping you here. Grateful." The word was a knife. I pushed the papers back toward them. No. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, every second slicing deeper into the tension. My son's jaw clenched. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not love, not even frustration, but cold, calculated anger. "Mom," he said, his voice low and hard, "don't be stubborn. You don't want to make us your enemies. Enemies. I pressed my lips together, holding in the sob that clawed at my throat. My hands shook beneath the table, but my voice came out steady. You already made yourselves my enemies the moment you slid those papers across this table. His wife stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the hardwood floor. Enough. If you don't want to sign now, you'll regret it later. The two of them left the dining room, their footsteps echoing down the hall. I sat alone at the table, the smell of cold chicken suffocating me. My appetite was gone, my heart in pieces. That night, I cried into my pillow until it was damp. I cried for the boy I lost, for the husband who wasn't here to shield me, for the home that suddenly felt like a cage. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. A seed of fire. Small, quiet, but fierce. They thought I was weak. They thought age had stripped me of my strength. But they forgot one thing. This house, this life, this legacy, I built it brick by brick. And I would burn before I let them steal it from me. The morning after that dinner, sunlight streamed weakly through my curtains, but it brought me no warmth. My house, the place I once called my sanctuary, suddenly felt foreign, dangerous, as though every corner carried whispers of betrayal. I shuffled into the hallway, and for the first time, I noticed how quiet it had become. Not the peaceful quiet of a home filled with love, but the suffocating silence of a place where your presence is no longer welcome. I tried to make coffee in the kitchen, but when I reached for my old porcelain mug, it was gone. My daughter-in-law's voice cut through the stillness like a blade. Mom, I've rearranged the cabinets. Don't touch the top shelf, it's for our things. Our things. My own mug, the one my husband bought me for our 25th anniversary, had been shoved somewhere out of reach. I bit my lip, nodding without a word. From then on, it was clear. I was no longer the mistress of this house. I was a tenant without rent, a guest overstaying her welcome. Every day, new rules appeared. Subtle at first, then louder. Harsher. Don't leave your knitting on the sofa. Stay in your room when we have friends over. Don't use the washing machine at night. It disturbs us. Each rule chipped away at me, like termites chewing through the beams of a home until all that remains is dust. I began retreating to my room more often, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only place left that still felt like mine. Even that was stripped bare over time. My daughter-in-law suggested I downsize. She removed my late husband's armchair, saying it took up too much space. She boxed away photographs, claiming they cluttered the walls. I sat on my bed at night staring at blank walls, aching for the comfort of familiar faces. The worst came one afternoon when I wandered into the living room to watch the news. My son's voice stopped me cold. Mom, what are you doing here? Didn't we agree this space is for us? His wife smirked from the sofa. She doesn't understand boundaries. Maybe she'd be better off in one of those senior communities. Senior community. The word stabbed deeper than any knife. My house had turned into a prison, and now they wanted to exile me completely. Still, I tried to hold on to dignity. I cooked small meals in the kitchen when they weren't around. I watered the garden early in the mornings before the house woke up. But even there, she followed me. You're wasting water, she snapped one morning as I sprinkled the roses my husband had planted. These old plants need to go. We're redoing the yard. I touched the petals softly, whispering to them like I once whispered to my children. My garden was more than flowers. It was memory, love, and time made visible. And now even that was being stripped from me. Neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Wilson from next door stopped me at the mailbox one day. You look tired, Margaret. Are they treating you all right? I forced a smile, nodding, but my eyes betrayed me. She pressed a hand over mine. If you need anything, you know where I am. It was the first crack of light in the suffocating dark. Someone still saw me. Someone still believed I mattered. But back inside, the torment grew worse. Meals were eaten without me. My daughter-in-law threw parties, laughter spilling into the hallways while I sat in my room like an invisible ghost. My son avoided my eyes whenever I passed him, his guilt buried under the weight of her control. One evening I overheard them in the kitchen. "She'll cave soon," his wife whispered. "She has no choice. Once she signs, we'll finally be free. Free." They thought freedom came from my chains. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, every word echoing in my head. My chest ached, but inside the ache was something sharper. Anger. It had been planted during that dinner. But now it grew roots, curling through every part of me. I realized something important. They had underestimated me. They thought I was trapped. They thought they had stolen my voice. But I was listening, watching, waiting. The walls of this house may have become my prison, but they also became my witness. They had seen me at my lowest, and soon they would see me rise. The house had turned into a cage, but even cages have cracks if you look hard enough. I began to notice things, small details most people would dismiss, but I've lived long enough to know nothing is ever small when it comes to betrayal. One morning, as I walked past the study, I saw my son at the desk, hurriedly stuffing papers into a drawer when he heard me shuffle in the hallway. He slammed it shut and forced a smile. "Morning, Mom," he said too quickly. His wife's voice followed from the kitchen, sharp and commanding. "Don't forget to mail those forms today." Forms. I carried that word with me all day. Later, when I went to fetch a broom from the hall closet, I spotted an envelope sticking out of the wastebasket. Curiosity, or perhaps survival, made me pick it up. Inside were bank notices, transactions I didn't recognize, amounts withdrawn from accounts I had never authorized. My name was on the statements, but the handwriting on the signature lines, it wasn't mine. I felt my knees weaken. I gripped the doorframe, breathing hard. They weren't just planning to take my future. They were already stripping away my present. That night, I searched my room for old files, the ones my husband and I had kept safely in a wooden chest. Birth certificates, property deeds, wills, all tucked away in envelopes yellowed with time. My hands shook as I compared his neat penmanship with the messy scrawls I'd seen on the bank forms. It was clear as daylight. Someone was forging my signature. I decided to test them. The next morning, I asked casually, "Did we ever pay the insurance bill last month?" My daughter-in-law froze just for a second, then smiled too sweetly. "Of course. Why do you ask?" I watched her carefully. Her eyes flickered, not with concern, but calculation. I began keeping a notebook in secret. Every time I caught a strange envelope, every phone call I overheard, every receipt that appeared in the trash, I wrote it all down. One afternoon, when they were out shopping, I crept into the study. The desk drawer wasn't locked. Inside, I found piles of forms, bank withdrawals, loan applications, even a draft of a new will. My hands trembled as I read the words. According to this piece of paper, I was leaving everything: house, land, savings, not to both of my children, not divided fairly, but to my son and his wife alone. My daughter, my grandchildren, even myself, I was erased from my own story. I pressed a hand over my mouth to keep from crying out. Rage surged through me, hot and dizzying. My own son had written me out of my own life. The floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Still, I hurriedly replaced the papers, closed the drawer, and rushed back to my room before they returned. My pulse didn't slow until I heard their laughter echoing down the hall. That night, I prayed. Not for forgiveness, not for peace, but for strength. Strength to fight, strength to survive, strength to prove that an old woman was not so easily broken. The next day, I took a bold step. I slipped out of the house before sunrise, shuffling down the road to the small law office where my husband's old friend, Mr. Kent, still practiced. He looked up in surprise when I walked in, his eyes softening with recognition. "Margaret," he said gently, "what brings you here?" I set the papers on his desk, my voice shaking. "Tell me the truth. Did I sign these?" He studied the signatures, his brow furrowing. He pulled out a magnifying glass, comparing the strokes with old deeds he had on file. After a long silence, he looked up. "This isn't your writing," he said firmly. Margaret, these are forged. The room spun around me, but at the center of the storm, clarity crystallized. My suspicion was no longer suspicion. It was fact. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes for a moment. I could almost hear my husband's voice, steady and strong. Don't let them take what's ours. I opened my eyes and met Mr. Kent's gaze. Then we fight, I said quietly, but with a conviction that surprised even me. From that moment, my notebook became a weapon. Every scrap of evidence, every overheard word, every date and time was ammunition. At home, I played the role they expected. I shuffled slowly, nodded when they mocked me, smiled faintly when they whispered about nursing homes. But inside, I was sharper than I had ever been. They thought I was blind, but I saw everything. They thought I was deaf, but I heard every word. They thought I was weak, but I was gathering strength. And when the time came, I promised myself I would not just defend what was mine. I would make them regret ever thinking they could erase me. I had always believed that silence was weakness, but I was wrong. Silence can be the sharpest blade, the deadliest weapon, if you know how to wield it. And I was learning quickly. At home, I let them think they were winning. I let my son bark orders, let his wife sneer at me, let them believe I was too tired, too broken, too old to resist. I shuffled slower, I smiled weaker, I nodded more. All while, inside me, a fire raged that could not be extinguished. Every cruel word they tossed my way, I stored in the vault of my memory. Every document I caught in the trash, every whispered conversation I overheard, I wrote in my notebook. They saw an old woman fading into the background. What they didn't see was a soldier preparing for battle. My first ally came unexpectedly. Mrs. Wilson, my neighbor, knocked on my door one afternoon with a pie in her hands. She was kind, older than me, but sharper than most people half our age. She glanced at the way my daughter-in-law snatched the pie from her without thanks, and her lips tightened. Later, when I walked her back to the gate, she leaned close and whispered, "Margaret, I hear things. If you need me to speak on your behalf, I will." Her words lit something in me. I wasn't as alone as they wanted me to believe. Next came Mr. Kent, the lawyer. He wasn't just my husband's old friend anymore, he was my confidant. He taught me which documents mattered, which signatures would crumble under scrutiny, and how to keep my evidence safe. I visited him quietly, slipping out early in the mornings while they slept, my shawl wrapped tightly around me against the chill. "You're building a strong case," he told me one morning as he slid the forged papers into a folder. "But you must be patient. Timing is everything. Patience." That was the hardest part. At home, the charade continued. One evening, I sat at the dinner table, pushing peas around my plate while my daughter-in-law bragged about her new jewelry. "Gold, real gold," she said, holding her wrist out so it caught the light. "We can finally afford nice things," I smiled faintly, though inside my blood boiled. I knew where the money came from, my accounts, my inheritance, my life savings. "You should treat yourself too, Mom," she said mockingly. "Oh, but I suppose you wouldn't know where to shop for things like this." I lowered my gaze, murmuring softly, "You're right." They laughed, believing me beaten. But in that moment, I promised myself, one day soon, their laughter would die on their lips. A week later, I overheard another conversation. My son's voice was hushed but urgent. "We need to hurry. If she finds out before the transfer is complete, everything falls apart." I pressed my ear against the wall, heart pounding. His wife hissed back, "She's too stupid to notice." "Don't worry. We'll have the house deed in our hands before she knows it." Too stupid. I bit my lip until it bled. Let them think that. Let them underestimate me. Every insult was another weapon I could turn against them. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought of my husband again. He used to tell me I was stronger than I realized. "You've survived worse, Margaret. Don't ever let anyone bury you before your time." His words echoed inside me, and for the first time since his death, I believed him. The next morning, I walked through the house with new eyes. This wasn't just my home anymore. It was the battlefield. The walls would witness, the floors would remember, and the truth would one day speak louder than their lies. For now, I stayed silent. For now, I played weak, but my silence was no longer their victory. It was the sound of war beginning. The day of reckoning arrived dressed not in thunder or fire, but in the quiet shuffle of my shoes across the polished marble floor of the courthouse. I clutched my shawl tightly around my shoulders, my notebook tucked deep into my handbag, my heart pounding like a war drum. For months, I had lived as a ghost in my own home, silent but watchful. Now I was no longer a ghost. I was a storm walking into the light. The courtroom smelled of old wood and dust, the kind of place where truth and lies have wrestled for centuries. My son and his wife were already there, sitting tall at the defendant's table. His suit was pressed, his wife's dress expensive, and their smug smiles told the whole story. They believed they had already won. When my eyes met my son's, he looked away as though ashamed. But his wife met my gaze head-on, her lips curving into a cruel smirk. "Old woman," her eyes seemed to say, "you don't stand a chance." The judge entered, and silence blanketed the room. My lawyer, Mr. Kent, stood beside me. His voice was calm, but I saw the steel beneath it. "Stay strong, Margaret. We've got them cornered." The proceedings began. Their lawyer rose first, his words slick and rehearsed. "Your Honor, my clients only wanted what was best for their aging mother. She is old, forgetful, incapable of managing her affairs. Out of love and responsibility, they took over her finances to ensure her safety." Love. Responsibility. Words twisted into chains. I clenched my fists under the table. My lawyer stood slowly, his tone measured but cutting. "With respect, Your Honor, this case is not about love. It is about theft. It is about betrayal. And we have proof." The first piece of evidence was my bank statements. Pages of transactions I had never made appeared on the screen before the court. Large sums withdrawn, jewelry bought, vacations paid for, all with my signature at the bottom. The judge peered down at me. "Mrs. Harris, did you authorize these?" I rose to my feet, my voice trembling but clear. "No, Your Honor, I never touched those accounts." My son shifted uncomfortably, his wife whispering furiously in his ear. Next came the handwriting expert. He displayed side-by-side comparisons of my real signature and the forgeries. Even to the untrained eye, the differences screamed from the page. The strokes, the slants, the pressure, it was a lie written in ink. The courtroom murmured. My daughter-in-law's smirk faltered. Then came the neighbors. Mrs. Wilson took the stand, her voice steady. "I heard them talking one evening. She said, 'She'll cave soon. Once she signs, the house will be ours.'" Gasps echoed. My son's face drained of color. His wife glared daggers, but the blade was dull now. Finally, it was my turn. I stood before the court, every wrinkle on my face a testament to survival. My voice shook at first, but with every word it grew stronger. They told me to be grateful. Grateful to live in my own house, grateful to be humiliated, grateful to be erased from my own life. But I am not blind. I am not senile. And I will not be stolen from. My son slammed his fist on the table. "She's lying. She doesn't remember anything. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order!" Mr. Kent delivered the final blow. The false will was projected onto the screen. "This document claims to be signed by Mrs. Harris, but look here, the date is wrong. The witness listed is fictitious. And the notary stamp belongs to an office that closed 5 years ago. This is not just manipulation, Your Honor. This is fraud." The courtroom buzzed like a hive struck with a stick. The judge leaned forward, eyes hard. "I have heard enough." His voice carried finality, the sound of scales tipping toward justice. He read the verdict slowly, each word sinking into my bones like balm on a wound. "The will is invalid. The financial transfers unauthorized. This court restores all property and assets to Mrs. Margaret Harris. Furthermore, charges of fraud are hereby filed against the defendants." Silence fell. My son buried his face in his hands. His wife sat frozen, her lips parted but no words escaping. The arrogance, the cruelty, the smirks, all gone. I lowered myself into my chair, tears spilling freely now. Not of sorrow, but of release. For months I had been a prisoner in silence. Now my voice had broken their walls. When the gavel fell a final time, it wasn't just a sound of judgment. It was the sound of chains breaking,